Hey folks, Joe Valley here. Welcome back to another episode of the Quiet Life Podcast. Today's episode is another incredible exits episode. Chris Wozniak worked with Michael Donovan, helping him exit his 3-year-old content business that he started from scratch and ended up doing about $43,000 in revenue in his last month at the end of 2022. Pretty impressive after 3 years. Quite the story, quite the success story. Had some trouble during the first offer that he got, and not his fault. It was SBA and then some issues with an algorithm update that he talks about a little bit. He's risk averse. He talks about it at the beginning of the podcast. And then in the middle, we talk about, good thing he was risk averse, and it worked out pretty well for him. And he's also started a new company helping others learn what he's doing along the way as well. So let's take a listen. This is Incredible Exits with Michael Donovan. Here we go. Michael, welcome to the Quiet Life Podcast.
Hey, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Congratulations on your exit, working with Woz, getting a content site sold. How's it feel?
It's been great. It's been about a couple of weeks now, but very, very happy with the outcome.
Let's talk. Well, we can jump to the punchline. It was a high 6-figure exit. It was a long process with the first buyer fell through, and then like 3 weeks with the second one. We'll get into the details there, but let's talk about why. Why sell? Why did you sell this business? I know you got some stuff going on in your life. What's going on?
Yeah, sure. I'll keep this condensed. I think most people, when they sell, there's always more than one reason. At least I've found. So it's never really one thing. For me, that was certainly the case. So, a handful of personal things. I have a new baby girl, 10 days old. That's our second kid. And so she was born just after we sold the site. So that I knew that was coming. I knew I wasn't going to be able to give the attention that I was previously with just our son, Declan. So having 2 kids changes things a little bit. And that was certainly true and has been. So I'm glad I sold. We're moving out of this house that we're in now. We love this home. It's on a lake. It's great for me. My wife and I were without kids, but it's 1,100 square feet. So we quickly outgrew this space. So we just bought a home about 15 minutes south of here. So we're moving as well. So those were 2 big personal reasons. But on the financial side, I think once, my personal preference was when the asset became a high percentage of our overall net worth or accounted for a higher percentage than I was comfortable with. That's when I felt like, okay, maybe we should assess taking some chips off the table here. It allowed us to do some things like buy that house and keep this house and rent it. But I just was starting to get a little uncomfortable with the percentage of our net worth. And then, so at that point, having cash on hand was more valuable than cash flow. Although I will say I missed the cash flow part.
Cash flow is wonderful, but it's not without risk. And we'll talk about what happened during that first LOI here in a bit as well. Yeah. First, congratulations on the daughter, 10 weeks old. Are you completely exhausted yet? Because it's probably about 3 months in for me when fatigue hit, like a sledgehammer.
So luckily she's doing good. I mean, she has to wake up every 3 hours to eat like all babies, but we got pretty used to it. My wife and I were just joking, like you kind of forget what happened with your first kid. I think evolution has a role in that, so that you black out all the bad stuff so you'll have another kid. You'll keep reproducing. But no, it's been okay. We've been sleeping okay so far. So
good for you. Hey, look, word of advice, been married 25 years, a couple of kids under my belt. Hindsight's 2020. There's nothing wrong with you sleeping in a separate room for the week and then switching so that you both get some rest instead of you both being exhausted. My 2 cents.
With our new house, that might be an option. Here it is not.
It's not an option, right? Right. Well, this is awesome. So let's talk about the site itself. It's a content site. And did you build it or buy it?
Yeah, so I built it. It was actually the first site that I ever tried. And it was a content site monetized 96% with just display ads, and the rest were, a couple $100 a month was coming from Amazon associates.
Did you start it as a side hustle? Did you have a full-time job at the time?
Yeah, I did and still do. I have a full 9 to 5. I started it just before the pandemic hit in 2020. I'm an hour south of Boston. My full-time job is in Boston. And at the time, I was commuting in and out via train. And I was, hour in, hour out, 2 hours a day minimum, basically, where I'm listening to podcasts. It wasn't wasted time, but I wasn't being very efficient with that time. And so that's when I started writing articles, was on the train. And just, slowly but surely that first year, I think I had 40 total posts for the full first year. And obviously I ramped that up as I went. But yeah, that was the start of it. And at the end of, I think it took 6 months to make my first dollar, which was exciting. And then
was it literally $1 or $10?
No,
How much
no.
you get paid that first month?
So at that point, I didn't have display ads because I didn't qualify for some of the bigger. I didn't know much about Ezoic. I did turn that on at this maybe 7 or 8 month mark, but it was Amazon Associates, and they only pay you once you hit $100. Right. So I made my first dollar. It was probably a $4 commission. And then actually, it's funny, I didn't set up my bank account. So Amazon sent me a physical check. It was $106 is what that month or whatever it was. My wife framed it for me. I actually like that a lot. But yeah, so I got a physical check from Amazon for $106 or so after, I think, month 8 or 9.
So how long did you run the business before you connected with Woz and ended up selling it?
So my first conversation with Chris was probably a little over 2 years into having the site. And that was just hey, site's making $20,000 a month at that point. Yeah. I'm not thinking about selling right now, but I have an asset on my hands that I didn't fully expect to have. What sort of things should I be thinking about? And so we had a good hour conversation just about, hey, let's lay the foundation. And then when we connect again, whenever you do decide to sell, you kind of have that foundation. I ended up selling a little over 3 years into owning the site.
Do you have expertise in SEO or any kind of background like that allowed you to build up a site to get $20,000 a month in revenue after 2 years?
No, so I had no SEO experience. I do work for a tech company, but I'm a program manager. I'm not, not technical in that way. But I did consume a lot of podcasts and YouTube videos on building. So, Niche Pursuits by a guy called Spencer Hawes.
Great kid.
I listened to a lot of his stuff. And, as I was listening and hearing people say these numbers, I was like, where is this money coming from? Like they're saying, $50,000 a month with a simple blog. How? Right. And so as I went down that rabbit hole, I thought, one, I think I could do this. And two, if I made 10% of what this guy's saying he's making, that could be life-changing for me. Yep. In our day-to-day life, we're not going to retire or anything, but it would be great to have some extra income. And then it went from 20 to 30. I think the best month I had was 45,000 in a month. And so it really blew like my perception of what was possible with a blog. And when I hear the word blog still, I have a weird reaction to it. I think of like when I heard blog the first time, I used to think, you go home and you have dinner with some people, you tell the world what you ate for dinner that night. Right. It's all first. It's like a journal, right? That's what I used to think of. I didn't think of it as like possibly one of the best business models in the world. It's really what it is.
With incredible margins as well. I looked at your numbers and your margins were hovering profit wise 97, 98% of the total monthly revenue. I understand that you were taking some money off the table and you felt more comfortable with cash in the bank versus cash flow. But had you considered quitting your day job and going all in on this, given the numbers and the potential? This is the danger of being an entrepreneur. It's like we want more, we think we can gain more, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it was certainly something that crossed my mind. I'm extremely risk adverse. And so was it a thought? Yes. But then my rationale was and still is, health insurance in this country is expensive. We knew we were having another baby. I wanted to make sure I had great coverage when she was born. That was a big consideration. And also property, right? We have some aspirations to, this house that I'm in now will become our first rental. Hopefully we're fortunate enough to acquire a few more properties. Banks do not love, when you don't have stable W-2 income reported for at least 2 years. My site had a great 2022. I think it did, I think we 350,000 last year when I owned it. But the year before that, it wasn't much, right? And so if I had quit and went to the bank and tried to buy the house that I just bought, they would tell me, good luck. They would not have given me the loan that I got. And so those were two big considerations. And then the third, and maybe actually bigger than the first two, is I don't love the idea of my entire family's money coming in depending on an algorithm that I have zero influence over. And we can get into some of the stuff happening with AI, but there's just so much uncertainty to just walk away and say, I'm going to rely on this thing to pay my bills. I didn't love that idea.
I hear you. Yeah. So let's talk about that. Credit to you for reaching out and getting some advice like from Woz about, hey, look, I'm thinking about selling. What's the deal here? How do I approach this? What's the value? What should I do? You did that in about a year in advance of actually working with him to sell your business. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, about a year. Yep.
Okay. And You went under LOI. You had a pocket buyer. I saw some of the notes, and it was an SBA buyer. Let's talk about that. Gosh, what, the 9-month process? Something, I forget what it was, 7, 8 months before it fell apart. And some of the things that happened here. Because folks, I want you to listen to this, because as entrepreneurs, we have a tendency to always say, I can do that, I can do better, I can earn more. This is what sets us apart from just having a day job. We're not as risk averse, Michael, as you're talking about self. I think what you're talking about is really smart, right? In many ways, I look back on my 25-year career as an entrepreneur, and I think if I could have been a little more risk averse, right, things would have been slightly different. But at the same time, risk is good, and it makes you sleep less at night, but you get to the ends a little quicker. Anyway, you went under LOI with a great buyer that offered a great price through WAS, and it was an SBA loan. Talk to us about that process and what happened.
Yeah. So, I went back, I sent a newsletter summarizing this, so I have some of the information top of mind. But the first buyer, you're right, was an SBA buyer. Admittedly, I knew very little, so luckily I did have Chris to explain, what that meant, and certainly, a risk involved with an SBA buyer, frankly, is timing, right? And time kills every deal. You give it enough time, the deal will die. And in this case, it depends on who's applying. If you're getting a bank that's SBA preferred, that can expedite things. In this case, these buyers gave a great offer of a low 7-figure amount. It was a great multiple. They needed the SBA loan in order to make that work. And so we started that process. If I flash forward, that entire process, they got approved for their first SBA loan. However, the terms of that deal were asking those potential buyers to put, I think, some of their other businesses tied into it somehow. So if they defaulted or
guaranteeing
it, and they didn't like that idea, which I understood. And so that lender knew another lender that said, actually, the other lender that I'm talking to won't require these same terms. They'll be more favorable. And I will share everything that I put together for your SBA with me. I'm going to hand off to him so that we're not starting over again. And, talking with Chris, we kind of weighed the pros and cons of that, of like, should we list it instead and, have more competition? We still felt like these guys were very serious, and they were. Mm-hmm. And so we decided to allow that. And so it went to this next bank. They started the process again. Long story short,
typically it can take anywhere from 75 to 90 days from letter of intent to closing with an SBA loan. In this situation, you got most of the way down that process and then had to switch banks. How long?
That's right.
How much time passed before you had to switch banks, or your buyers had to switch banks?
I think it was about the timeline that you just described. Admittedly, I don't have that number top of head, but it was about that. And then the next bank was much quicker. I think it was maybe 30 some odd days.
Yeah, they had everything. So
they had everything. Yeah. They weren't starting from scratch. And the end to end, it was about 115-day process for the whole thing.
Before we talk about what happened in that situation, talk to me about your emotional state up to this point. You've got these guys that are going to switch banks. You talked about it with Chris. You've got a good number on the table. How are you feeling about that and being patient and waiting?
Yeah, that's not my strong suit. Patience is not something that I do great. I like to move quickly, get results. It was, admittedly, maybe one of the harder things I've done. It sounds kind of funny. It was emotionally grueling. And the reason is that one of the big things that we haven't mentioned is all the while that I got this big number, I'm getting excited. Obviously, we didn't make any decisions based on that, but you start dreaming a little bit of what we'll do with the money. All the while, my business is starting to decline. And so traffic is dropping. And obviously traffic, it's not directly correlated, but it's pretty close to what you're going to make when you monetize with display ads. It's all about the numbers. And so as, time is passing, traffic is dropping. I'm getting worried that the buyers are going to get spooked and back out, right? And so it just dragged on month after month after month. And every day I'm waking up, looking at Google Analytics, hoping I still have a business that's sellable. It was really tough.
What happened? Why did the numbers start to drop?
Yeah, so these days it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly what the reason. It used to be Google would update their algorithm a couple times a year max, right? And if you know anything about the space or follow it closely, they're rolling out 2 updates simultaneously now month, they'll start the month, roll an update. 1 week into that update, they'll roll out another update on top of it. And so they're changing their ranking algorithms, almost, it feels like every other week at this point. It's not quite that, but it's a lot. And so that, in combination with my site got hit with a manual action from Google, which admittedly I didn't know a lot about. They don't do that much anymore. What that means is that someone from Google, their algorithm, or they couldn't quite pick up that something was wrong, but they were looking at the site and they said something's wrong here, and we're going to put a manual penalty on the site. And so this specific penalty was for unnatural inbound links to the website. And so I can talk a little bit about what I think that might have been, but that hurt the site as well. They don't say like, oh, your traffic's going to get killed by this, but it certainly doesn't help, right, in the grand scheme of things. And so that penalty came on maybe a week after I started talking to the first potential buyers. We disclosed it. Chris and I disclosed it immediately. The buyers said, hey, we understand. We still want to move forward. We still think it's a great asset. And the reason, I had gone 3 years building this site. I never built a single link. I never bought a link. I never guest posted. I never did any link building of any kind. I got some natural, great authoritative links early on. And then about, 2.5 years in, I started thinking, what's my biggest weakness? It's my authoritativeness of the site. And so I engaged with a company that does link building. They assured me that they weren't buying these links, that they were, building them. And I do Harrow now. I think it's great. I think there's great ways to build links that are safe. I got the first 8 links back from these guys. They weren't cheap. It was like $3,000 a month for the service, but I thought, I'll reinvest in the business. They were garbage links. They were truly bad websites. If you looked at them looked at their backlink profile, you could tell that they had been gamed to have the authority that they had. And so long story short, I said, hey, I want the money back and I want you to remove the links, which they did. And so those links were only live. 8 links. Those links were live for like 20 days. They were up, then they were gone. And then 2 months later, I get this penalty from Google.
Wow.
Yeah, it was devastating.
And you've calculated how much that cost you.
Significant. Yeah. Yeah, it was significant. And so
you're trying not to live it. Here I am just poking, the open wound. And you're like, dude, shut up. I put that behind me now.
But it's a good lesson. I think it's important. It's an important lesson. It was an important lesson for me, certainly. And you can't ever say definitively what it was, right? Because Google doesn't tell you. They just said unnatural inbound links. They never give a single example. There's no one you can ask. No one's going to tell you exactly what it was. And so you have to infer and make some, educated guesses as to what caused this. I think that's the only possibility. There is nothing, every site, once you get big and you start to get, at the peak, the site was getting 800,000 page views a month. Once you get to that point, you're going to attract spammy links naturally. Can't avoid it. Nothing you can do to avoid it. You can disavow those links in your search console if you choose. But Google's gotten very good at handling just naturally spammy links. They just don't look at them.
So I think 800,000 unique visitors a month.
Yes,
page views a month.
How
many articles did you have at that time?
320, give or take.
And you're writing these articles on your own in your spare time, no help.
Correct. So 90+% of the articles I wrote myself. There was a period of time where I tried to hire some writers. That was crazy in and of itself. If someone wants to become a billionaire, have actually great writers. I guess no one does that because they just use them for themselves. But I went on ProBlogger, Fiverr, Upwork, anywhere you can find a writer, I went. I had 4 at once at one point that were helping me. Quality was just never that great. I was always heavily editing the content, wasn't quite up to what I wanted. I was spending so much time that I ultimately just said, forget it.
Just do it yourself.
I just do it myself. It was working. I didn't mind the writing. I didn't love it, but I didn't mind it. And so I just kept doing it myself. But yeah, so anyways, long story short, when you're building a site like that and you have an asset on your hands, you have to be very careful about who you engage, certainly when it comes to links. And so I think the combination of that penalty plus Google changing their algorithm a lot during that time, it could have been a combination of those things, but traffic dropped a little over 50% during the sale period. What was great was that when Chris and I listed the site publicly after the first buyer fell through, we listed it, only cash offers we accepted. 2 days after we listed it, the penalty was lifted from Google. And so that was great. So we had some buyers who were already interested in buying it with us fully disclosing the penalty. Now we could come back to them and say, hey, great news. Penalties lifted. So any concerns you had there, you were already interested. Now you probably are more interested at this price because we got the penalty lifted.
At that point, well, how long was the penalty in place?
That was in place for almost 4.5 months.
Okay. So it affected your income in that 4.5 months by how much?
So we went from August was the best month at 43,000 that month.
Mm-hmm.
It dropped in December. It was down to 32,000. And then January, I think it was at 12 or 13,000. Now, that's not really, those aren't apples to apples months, as you know, in the display ad business.
Yeah.
Display ad rates drop almost 50% or more during that time from December to Q4 to Q1.
So did you think, so maybe $25,000 to $30,000 overall that you might have lost during that 4-month period?
I think that's fair. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's a fair assessment.
So did you have a conversation with Woz at that point that might have gone like, look, if you hold on, it's back, the penalty's lifted, let's wait 12 months, your business is growing, you're not going to have this penalty, you just take that 25 to 30,000 times the multiple, you're going to gain that if everything is normal. Did you have a conversation like that?
Yeah. So Chris did give me multiple opinions, right? He didn't push me in any one direction, but he did bring that up as a potential thing of, hey, you have this asset, it's been working very well. This is unfortunate, but you've got it lifted. Maybe we take it off, you hold on to it, let's see what happens. I mean, traffic went up 15% the week that it got removed. And then what I've heard is that it takes a while. It doesn't just like rebound right away. If that was the main contributing thing for me, what I was doing personally in my life at that point, I wanted to sell this site. I had made my mind up at that point, for better or worse. I was like, I'm offloading this site. I also mentally could not imagine myself writing one more article for this website. Like it was just so, and I knew all those things. So knowing that, I was like, if I hold on to this thing, I'm not going to do it justice, right? For the next 12 months. And so just knowing that, take the hit, it was still a great outcome in the end. I think in the time that I owned it, plus the sale, 7 figures of profit on a blog that I never imagined was going to, if you told me then I'd do $1,000 a month, I'd say, what a win. What a success that was. So there was no question in my mind I was selling this site.
Let's do some quick math. Did you make more? What we often say, what I talk about in the book is that, you're going to make at least, typically 50% of all the money you ever make comes at the time you sell. Ballpark, how's that math work in you operating the business for 3 years?
I made double with the sale what I ever made total with the site.
Okay. So you read the book as well, right? I believe.
I admittedly didn't finish reading all of it, but I read a lot of it. Yeah.
The experience, but it's actually, I call it a reference book at times. At certain stages in your business, you can go back to certain chapters and redigest it. It's just too much to digest all at once.
And with the simple content, a content business is so simple. It's just like boil down a business to the most simple form. That's a content business. Mm-hmm. And there's some things in there, I didn't have inventory. There's a lot of things in there that weren't applicable to me in my business at this time.
All right. So let's go on to this second buyer. The first buyer fell apart because the traffic numbers concerned them. They were at a much higher value based upon previous numbers. You went back out to market, you picked a price. How long did it take to go under LOI that second time? It
took 5 or 6 days, maybe a little less. Actually, it was probably 4 or 5 days.
And how long did it take to close?
20 days. And I told Chris, I said, listen, so this time around, the baby was this impending, thing that was happening. Also, the house we knew was happening. And so I was like, hey, I want to make sure this thing closes. What can we do? He said, let's just go for cash only buyers. And so, as you know, cash is king. They can move quick. That's what happened in our case. And I just want one quick comment about the first buyer. They were great guys. They put in and invested their time and money into that process. So I'm describing it as painful for me. It was equally painful for them. They did not want that outcome. But when they did the math, their SBA loan, it was $15,000 a month they had to pay roughly. Mm-hmm. My January month of $13,000 didn't even service their monthly debt payment on the loan. So the math didn't make sense. Right. And so I just want to those guys, I like them. They're good guys. They didn't want this outcome. I felt bad that it happened on their end too, but I was thrilled that the second deal went through as quickly as it did. 0 hiccups during the process. And all cash ended up being the right way to go for the second sale.
Addressing the first buyers, look, they learned a lot in this process, and as painful as it is, it's something that's never going to leave them, and they know what to look for, what the risks are, and things of this nature. The next time they go through this process, it's going to be that much easier for them as well.
It's an education. That's how I look
at it. Totally big education. Let's just, people that are listening, people that started listening at the beginning going, oh, wow, high six-figure exit, part-time, why in the world is he selling? And as you said, you're risk averse. And lo and behold, you got hit with an algorithm update. So your gut was right. Talk to me though about I talk about this. I've talked about this with 1,000 buyers over the years, or sellers over the years, or thousands to be honest. And that's the emotional process of selling, right? You can use math, logic. You can have all sorts of bravado about, no, I'm not accepting anything but this. When you get into it and you get into that process, it's emotional because it's a deep, deep examination of the business, which is a reflection of you. And then when you go under LOI, your emotions shift into really high gear. And then when you get, bounced around like you did for months, 3-4 months at a time, and you're having a baby and all this stuff. Tell me about how you just felt and how many times you've had to apologize to your wife.
My wife and to Chris. So the good thing is that Chris, having a broker, right? There's a cost. Of course, there's a cost with a broker. But in my, based on what we got and the process that we went through, I mean, Chris paid for himself twice over. And I can show the math to prove that. We got 15% over asking. And if he didn't give me the advice on doing capital gains tax for the sale, I would have been hit with another $155,000 in the check that I just wrote to the government. So he paid for himself in spades. But where he also paid for himself was, if anyone knows Chris Wozniak, his pulse is like flat. that guy is calm. And he even talks calmly. And so, when I was kind of frantic at certain points, sending him 4 emails in a row because I couldn't get my thoughts out in a single email, he was the person to just stay calm and relaxed and say, hey, this is, explain the situation. This is what happens. Here are the circumstances. But no, the emotional part of this, people talk about it. I've read about it. You hear other people say it was painful. Until you have the thing that you worked on for so long, like this close to getting an outcome that is significant for you, for your family, you start thinking about what you can do with that outcome. It's extremely emotional. And I was at a point where I'm working a 9 to 5. I've got a son who's, 1.5 years old. I'm working on this side business that's now become very significant. I stopped working out at that point, wasn't eating the best. And so already my body was not primed to be, jarred like it was. And so, it wasn't, I don't think I handled it particularly well, admittedly. I think the next time around, I would know what to expect. And I think a key point in that is I don't think I probably would have done anything different, to be honest. Things happen that were out of our control a bit, but I would have just gone in knowing that this is how it is. There is a lot of uncertainty. An LOI, frankly, means nothing. It is nice. It's a nice gesture. It's not legally binding. It doesn't mean anything. And it actually, Chris said this, when our second buyer signed the asset purchase agreement, which that is significant at that point. That's a binding, legally binding document. It's huge. But even Chris said, I'm going to wait to congratulate you until the wire's sent. I'm sure he's seen some stuff in his 15 years of doing this where it's like, until that money hits your account, you got to stay regulated. You have to stay calm.
But you can have more confidence once that asset purchase agreement signed. I think in my tenure here at Quiet Light, I think I've only seen one of my deals not close once the asset purchase agreement was
That's
signed.
Good to know.
And there was a penalty for it, and we sold it for more afterwards anyway. But it was an emotional toll, regardless. Sure. Stuff. So it's a pretty impressive story, right? You knew nothing about the space. You just listened to some podcasts, and off you went, and you've done it. So congratulations on that. I would assume, and tell me if I'm dead wrong, but now that you know this, now that you're capable of doing this, do you feel like you're going to do it again?
Yeah. So we during the process, I started getting on Twitter, very active on Twitter, and just sharing, because I saw a big opportunity. I didn't see a lot of people talking about this business actively. I didn't see a lot of people sharing just full transparency. Here's to the dollar that I'm making. Here are my expenses, and here's how I'm doing it. what's working for me. And as you know, in the content space, you can do things a lot of different ways and still win in a big way. But I was just on there constantly. And so that grew, I think I'm up to 30 some odd thousand people that are just paying attention to that piece of it. I have an identical twin brother. He saw what I was doing with the first site. So he was like, I need a piece of that. So he started his own site. In 6 months, he got up to over 50,000 page views, was making $3,000 a month. And then that site got clobbered. It's down now to, an algorithm update came and like overnight his traffic got wiped out, which if you follow other content creators, this is happening to a lot of people.
Did they cheat? Is it?
No, he wrote those articles himself. He wrote 140 articles. Offline, I can share the URL with you. You can take a look at it, but it was good content, similar to what I was doing. But there's just too many factors to know, exactly what is causing something to get hit these days.
Ewan Finzer's been a guest many times on the podcast, and he's got a portfolio of content sites, hundreds of them at this point. And they actually, his process is to write all the, I think it's to write 100 articles for each site and then launch it and wait a year and see what happens. He says it's a really bad idea to own just one for all the reasons you just talked about, because sometimes just stuff happens and an algorithm update occurs that you didn't cheat, you didn't lie, you didn't steal, you didn't do anything wrong that you know of, but somehow Google's algorithm changes and it affects your income.
And I think that's spot on. And so the reason I told that story of why I started sharing this stuff, that's built us into, now we have, a brand that we're trying to build around nichetwins.com. And the reason that we're doing that is we have right now, it's taking a long time, but we have 12,000 sessions a month now, split a third between organic social, direct, and organic traffic. And I sleep very well at night with that business. So that business has 4,000 email subscribers growing very quickly. We have different income streams for that business. We have different traffic sources for that business. It is well-rounded. It takes longer to do that. It has taken longer to do that. But I don't wake up in the morning and check Google Analytics and hope I still have a business. It's just way more stable than what I had before. I'm doing that publicly, and then privately, I'm working on a travel site with my wife, which is doing early days, but that's starting to get traffic. I think that could be a very good business in the long run. That's going to be a slow grind, but my mindset has changed. I'm more slower but better for longer is how I'm thinking about it now. And I think you do better by diversifying your traffic sources. I actually think there's an argument to be made for starting a niche site on a social channel first. That sounds kind of odd, but I think there's an opportunity to grow a social presence, then create a content site and intertwine the two. And I think your stability, your brand, the awareness, the signals that sends to Google that you're a real thing, a real entity, a person, a bit, whatever it may be. I think there's a lot to that. And so that's what we did with Niche Twins. It's working very well at the moment.
Yeah, and I didn't realize Niche Twins was a thing until now. So I'm looking at it now. It looks like you're helping and guiding others through your own personal experiences so that they can launch their own niche sites as well.
That's right. And part of the newsletter, like I just I sent out a newsletter last week. I'm sharing details that I wish I had seen when I went through the sale process. So I'm like getting into the nitty gritty of here was the timeline. Like with the last email I just sent, 108 days SBA loan process. Here were the milestones through that entire process that I dealt with, that I went through. Here was the 22-day cash buyer. Here are all the milestones. Here's, obviously stripping away all identifiers, but here's what an SBA loan application, like what that might look like and the closing costs associated with that. No names, no bank, nothing like that, but just details that I learned that I think it was a fantastic education. It would be great if someone else could learn that without having to pay for it in a certain way like I did in some ways. But yeah, so that's the whole goal of it, is just to be transparent. I'm not an expert. I've only done it once. I've done it for a little over 3 years now. So I definitely learned a ton. But just transparency. People really seem to respond to that when you're just like, hey, straight up, this is everything I'm doing. Here's what's working. Here's what's not.
I think it's fantastic. Go, anybody listening, nichetwins.com. I've got it up now. Take a look at it. See what he's got there. Further detail on your story and your process of building the site and exiting, which I think is great. Great. Any other last minute thoughts or tips or advice for folks that are considering building or selling an online business, even buying?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I see that most people struggle with is just being consistent, like all things in life, right? gym, relationships, like doing content. I think a lot of people, and it's cliche, but it's said a lot for a reason, people give up way too easily. And with organic traffic, you got to wait. It takes, and there's a reason, right? If Google just ranked everything right away, it would be flooded with garbage. And so there's a reason that these things take time. And it doesn't guarantee that if you just write for a year, you're going to succeed, but you certainly will never succeed if you write for 2 months and quit. You have to stick with it and see things through. And so some people just can't do it, which is, for people that are in this business, it's a good thing. It's kind of a moat around our business where if you give up too easily, that weeds out a lot of people. But if you're going to consider doing this, I wrote 40 articles in a year. I think most people are capable of writing 40 articles in 365 days.
How many words for the average article?
1,500 to 1,700 words.
Yeah. Okay.
Give or take.
Yeah.
So I think anyone can do it, but if you're going to do it, just commit to sticking with something. And that's another argument to maybe start with social, because there is some more, not right all the way, within a couple of days, but you get some instant feedback there. Mm-hmm. And if you're trying to test a niche or a way of sharing things, and you want to see if that's resonating, social can give you that fairly quickly, not immediate, but it can give you that. You can kind of test the waters a little bit there. If you need that feedback, you know what I mean?
I can see that. It seems like the social side of it would be more interactive. You'd be more active on the social stuff versus you can write, all of your articles and not have to, it'd be great for an introvert that doesn't want to, communicate with the outside world.
That's me.
Side. That's you?
Yeah.
You're good on the social.
That's certainly me.
Yeah. Well, listen, man, fantastic story. Congratulations. You've done some amazing stuff in a very short period of time with a full-time job. I love your approach of, being risk averse. Obviously, it's paying off. Congratulations to you, your family, and Woz, right? I mean, it takes a team effort. So congratulations.
For sure. Thanks, Joe. And thanks, Chris. If Chris listens to this, I appreciate all his help. And thanks for putting up with me. I think I probably sent him 10,000 emails over the course of 4 months, but it was a good
Woz probably won't listen to this, but I am going to send out a message to the team that I had you on the podcast today and that you said, quote unquote, Chris's pulse is flat, and then some complimentary things around.
Hey, Chris, that was a positive thing.
It's a positive thing.
Yeah.
All right, Michael, congratulations. Thanks for coming on and sharing your story. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.